What's going on, guys? Welcome back to WWE Network and Chill, where I, Graham G.S. and Matthews, break down all the original content you watch on the WWE Network. And today we're talking, finally, the Drew McIntyre, the Chosen One edition of WWE 24. Now, this went up 2 weeks ago, after TakeOver 31, the day of TakeOver 31. Didn't have a chance to watch it until, get this, yesterday. It was well worth the wait. It was a great 24. I have yet to watch a bad, subpar 24. They're all great. They're all really, really good. And this one was no exception, as I figured it would be. As I figured it would be another excellent installment in the series of stellar WWE 24 specials. So as you would probably expect, it chronicles Drew McIntyre's journey, not just over the last number of months going into WrestleMania 36, as the Chronicle obviously did, which was great, by the way. This was kind of like an expanded version of that, going back to when he first was born, his family, a lot of stuff I didn't honestly already know, breaking into the business, joining WWE, getting released, going to the indies, stuff like that. Really, really good stuff. So we start from the beginning here, and we see Drew modern day, well, not modern day, this was in April, looking at Raymond James Stadium from afar. This was right after the pandemic started, probably not the day of WrestleMania, but soon before WrestleMania. And he discusses how Raymond James Stadium is now being used as a testing site for COVID. So obviously running that arena for the event is basically impossible. And he's obviously very, beat up over the fact, he's heartbroken over the fact that he's not going to get his big moment as WWE champion, let alone just go for the championship, not even just winning it, but getting his big Mania match in the main event at a big arena like Raymond James Stadium. And instead they got to do it from an empty performance center, which we'll talk about later on. So we go all the way back to the beginning here, for the beginning of this 24, to when he was first born in Scotland. He talks his upbringing. He talks about how his mom found out around the time, I guess she was 18, that she had issues with her balance. And I forgot exactly what it was called. It was called cerebellum something. I forgot exactly what the second word was. But it was essentially an issue where she had an issue in her brain where she had a lot of problems with balance. So she would always have to hold on to things, stuff like that. As far as Drew was concerned, he was always obsessed over wrestling. He read about wrestling, had Stone Cold Steve Austin bed sheets, he had posters, he had the belts, he literally had everything. He had all the merch. His family talks about it, his brothers, his friends, his dad. They all talk about how obsessed Drew McIntyre was with wrestling growing up. As we all did, including myself. He even had his own little wrestling promotion as a kid with his brother and his friends, and they had their little own wrestling promotion. They would set up like mattresses in the backyard and wrestle on those. So at a certain age, he left to go train. He left home, went to go train, and they show footage. Actually, Jake the Snake, show footage of Jake the Snake coming to a session, which was pretty cool. And his trainers and people that he trained with talked about how they could tell right from the get-go that Drew was someone that stood out, that he was someone that was going to go far. He got it. He had charisma. He could go. He could sell. He was someone who just understood the business like that. You know what I mean? Just got it like in a snap. And he talked about getting more confident with each match. We hear from Killian Dane, who praised his size, praised his ability, because they all kind of came up on the indie scene together. We see a lot of pictures of Drew and Killian growing up, like as teenagers, early 20s, on the indie scene, and that's like 15, 20 years ago. You know what I mean? Like, that's crazy to see these kids so young. It was probably closer to like 15 years ago, but that's still nuts. So he mentioned how he spent his student loans. And now student loans are like, I guess it's kind of the same thing. But he talked about how he was given money as student loans to go to school and spend that on school supplies and whatever. And I guess he was still going to school. He may have mentioned going to college. I don't remember. Maybe the student loans were for, they can't pay for high school. I don't know what they would have been for. But instead of spending the student loans on books, he spent them on wrestling supplies and boots and supplements and going out and partying. And people were like, you probably shouldn't be doing that. But it was working out. He was getting in better shape, and he was a big party person growing up. He talks about hitting it off almost immediately with Sheamus at Irish Whip Wrestling in 2005. We see a lot of footage of those two working against each other. Barrett there as well, which is pretty funny. Those three kind of came up together in the Irish Whip Wrestling promotion back in 2005. So they were all, I think, invited to a WWE tryout, I believe in London, in April of 2007, which is crazy if it's like the same time period, the same Raw. Because like whenever they would do Raw overseas in England or whatever, I think they would hold tryouts like around that same time, because whenever they came to town, they would do it that same day, like the tryouts earlier on in the evening. So if that's the same Raw that Shawn and John Cena had their hour-long Raw match, because that would have been on Raw in April of 2007 in England, that's pretty fucking cool. So they got around, they took some bumps, did some stuff in the ring, some tryout matches, whatever. John Laurinaitis spotted Drew and said, I think I want to hire you. I want to bring you to the United States, is what he told Drew. Drew told him, I think you want to bring me to the United States, which is a great thing to say. So we ended up getting hired. I think Sheamus and Barrett were hired at that exact same time as well. They were all hired on that same day, around the same time. They all immediately reported to OVW. And the writers were there one day at a taping, and they scouted Drew. So they were all kind of on their best behavior, wanted to put their best stuff forward so they would get noticed. Howard Finkel ends up calling Drew to tell him that he's going on the road. And Drew thinks this is perfectly normal. Drew thinks this is a normal thing that happens until Paul Burchill, of all people, the pirate Paul Burchill, who was still there at that point, told Drew that's not a normal thing. That is, it's an abnormal thing. That's why people were kind of like not mean to him, but they were kind of like giving him an attitude and busting his balls, and they were kind of like weirder toward him than usual. And it was because they were jealous that he was going on the road, and he had no idea. So he debuted on the October 12th, 2007 edition of SmackDown, alongside Dave Taylor in a match, I think against Zack Ryder, Brian Myers at the time or whatever. Not Brian, that's Kurt Hawkins. No, was it? Were they going by the Major Brothers? I don't remember, but he faced Zack Ryder in his debut match. I remember that. He mentioned how it was not a great debut because he knew nothing about the cameras. He knew nothing about like where he should be looking and what he should be doing in the ring. His whole presentation, as good as he was in the ring, was entirely off. And that's not really his fault because they called him up way too soon. So they really should have told him more. They should have taught him more about the ropes and learning things before, putting him on SmackDown. I mean, they put him right on fucking SmackDown, not even like Velocity or a dark match. They put him right on SmackDown, which is crazy. It was pretty apparent, he said, that he needed to catch up. Everyone was kind of, everyone was aware of that. So he was very ecstatic, actually, to go to FCW to go learn. He had no issues with being called right back down to developmental. He knew he had to learn more. He was very happy to go there. It was a way better system than OVW because they could learn about the cameras and being on TV, and he said that he improved every week. So there was one FCW show that Vince was at to scout talent, and Drew knew that, so while he was in the ring cutting a promo or doing a match or whatever, he stared Vince right down in the face. And Vince likes that when people confront him right on and, they show that moxie or whatever, So Vince saw that and obviously was very high on the kid. So around that time, they were doing the ECW New Superstar Initiative. They were doing it like 07, 08, 09, where they would call people up from FCW to ECW. Obviously, the WWE version of ECW. Like, that's how Ricky Ortiz got called up. Sheamus actually got called up as part of the New Superstar Initiative, funnily enough. McIntyre didn't. Wait a second. So Sheamus actually got called up as part of the Superstar Initiative before McIntyre. McIntyre got called up to SmackDown instead. He was so special, they told him, that they wanted to move him separate and put him on SmackDown instead of ECW. But McIntyre got called up. They all got called up in different ways. So Sheamus went to ECW in the summer of 2009. Drew got called up to SmackDown in September of 2009, and Barrett got called up to NXT as part of the first season in early 2010. So they were all called up in different ways at different times. But yeah, the new Superstar Initiative gave us Sheamus, DJ Gabriel. Remember DJ Gabriel? Actually, I think Shawn Spears as well. The former, what was his name? Not Ty Dillinger. That's the name that they gave him in NXT. Gavin Spears, was that his name? I think that might have been his name. But Shawn Spears was a part of that new Superstar Initiative in late 2008. So anyway, he goes to SmackDown. Vince McMahon is in the ring, calling him a future world champion and all these things. Future my company, blah, blah, blah. And he's listening to the promo, Drew is, from Gorilla and going like, holy shit. Like, he's talking about me. Like, this is fucking crazy, So he felt very lucky to be in one of those top positions. He got called the chosen one right off the bat from Vince McMahon, from Mr. McMahon. And it was off to the races from there. He won the Intercontinental Championship in December of that year at the inaugural TLC pay-per-view, knocking off John Morrison. He said he was very proud to be the Intercontinental Champion, knowing the lineage of that title. And he said everything from there, in his mind, went exactly according to plan until it didn't. So we get to WrestleMania 26, and according to Sheamus, I had never heard this before. I thought this was very interesting. he said that he was supposed to face Taker at WrestleMania 26. Now, I don't know how accurate that is. Well, it is plausible, because Drew and Taker did have a match on SmackDown right before WrestleMania 26. And it honestly sounds a lot like what they were going to do with Kozlov when they were going to make Vladimir Kozlov, remember him, face Taker at WrestleMania 25 until they didn't. Because they were both undefeated and it was going to be streak versus streak. Maybe. I guess maybe I've read that before. I don't know. But the reason why I don't believe it is for a few different reasons. One, because they started building to Shawn and Taker in fucking December of 2009 at the Slammy Awards. And Drew was just a couple of months on the main roster. So unless they were discussing it, like right when Drew got called up, I don't know when else they would have been discussing it. And another thing is that Shawn and Taker and other people have mentioned this, that plans for Shawn and Taker 2 were in effect or kind of in the works as far back as the first match. As soon as it was over, they were discussing a sequel. So again, I mean, maybe Sheamus knows more than I would, obviously. He's obviously getting this info from Drew. But I don't know how accurate it is that he was supposed to face Taker at that WrestleMania. This I do know is a fact, that he was supposed to win Money in the Bank that year. A fucking writer came out later that year that used to work there that got fired and said that Drew was supposed to win Money in the Bank that year before plans changed. I mean, he was the chosen one. He was the Intercontinental Champion. It made sense for him to win Money in the Bank. They went with Swagger instead, which is so dumb. I think the plan went from, I don't know if it was Kofi then Drew or Drew then Kofi, but I think Kofi was also supposed to win it at some point before he didn't, because he was also getting pushed very heavily at the time until that changed as well. So anyway, he said outside of the ring, I was definitely coming undone. And Sheamus mentioned how it was kind of like a 1-2 punch, and how he got the Taker match taken away from him and the Money in the Bank briefcase that he didn't win, but he kind of got that taken away from him too because he was supposed to win it. And also around this time, his whole life kind of came apart. He got separated from his wife, Tiffany. They got divorced. They got married, I think, maybe earlier that year or in 2009. I don't remember, but he married former WWE diva Tiffany, Taryn Terrell. They had a big issue. I think there was like a domestic dispute like around SummerSlam time, and there were rumors that kind of contributed to him not getting pushed as, heavily because, for whatever reason, I don't know, because he had a lot of life issues, but there were rumors at the time that the whole domestic dispute, I don't think he was suspended, but Tiffany was. I don't think she ever came back. I think she got fired right after that, and she went to TNA a couple of years later. But yeah, there were rumors that was a factor as far as why he wasn't pushed any longer. In addition to that, though, his mother also got sick. And that was when he found out. He found out from the doctor when she went into the hospital that she had 36 hours to live. That's insane. And she couldn't talk, I guess, but he could. So we talked to her. He was very happy he got that chance. And then she passed. And it affected Drew very heavily. He gets very emotional talking about it, as obviously anyone would. It affected him heavily, both personally and professionally, especially. So he got very frustrated. He got very emotional. They did the 3MB thing. They talk a lot about 3MB. And Mahal says that he was disappointed with 3MB. Probably Jinder too, but definitely Drew, that he was disappointed with the whole 3MB thing. Drew constantly, even in his own words, said that he made excuses. He blamed everyone else but himself. We hear from his wife a lot too, which was cool. And the wife says that, Drew didn't really take his job seriously anymore after the whole 3MB thing. He kind of took it as a joke. He wasn't excited to go to work. He wasn't motivated. She used to pick him up sometimes from the house after he would drink all night. She used to pick him up hungover, like he was passed out hungover, whatever, and drop him off at the airport. That's how in rough shape he was at that point in time. They never really talked to Wrestling on the Road. 3MB did. They would just do their show, get changed, and then they'd go out and party. They fucking hated what they were doing. They probably enjoyed doing the 3MB thing to a certain extent. People enjoyed, it's 3MB. You could tell that all three guys fucking hated it. Maybe not Slater, because Slater was never really going to get above a certain level, but definitely Mahal and Drew, who were at one point looked at as the next crop of future top stars until they weren't. Obviously, both guys went on to win WWE titles, but at that point, they were just losers in 3MB. So they always went out to go party. They just stopped caring. And the wife says that he was just lost in his life at that point, and that she felt, or that she knew that he felt that he didn't have a lot of direction in his career. So he tells the story about how he just moved into a new apartment 3 days before getting the phone call that he was released from WWE. And, obviously he had that initial like, oh, I'm so excited I can go out and do other things. And that's what they all fucking say. But they're actually depressed. Don't give me that bullshit. Maybe some people, but all these people are like, oh, I'm so depressed. Like, I'm so happy to be out of WWE. I can go, I'm free. Like Zack Ryder, he was fucking sad. Like, he's all excited, and I'm sure he is excited. But he was also partially sad too, having spent the majority of his career there, and then getting the call that he was fired. No one wants to find out that they're fired. And he was no different. McIntyre was. He said that he was numb initially, and that he used to drink to forget that he got fired. He used to drink a lot. He would drink for days at a time. The wife wouldn't, speak, or he wouldn't speak to her. She really couldn't get through to him. She couldn't really get in contact with him sometimes. She would contact him, and she wouldn't really know where he was. His phone would die, and she would never hear from him at certain points in time, which is crazy. It was hard to get in touch with him. He was devastated. But at the same time, everyone tried to book him on shows, and he knew at that point, all right, I'm going to make something of myself after he kind of got over the self-pity and shit. He knew he didn't want to do his WWE gimmick, because he had heard from a few different people, I can do what made me famous in WWE, and then I can kind of move on from there. Like, for example, I'll do my 3MB gimmick, because that's what people know me as. He's like, I don't want to do that. So he got contacted by all these indies, but the one person he wanted to be contacted by was the ICW founder, and I forget his name, but he was all over this episode as well. The ICW founder said that he didn't contact her initially because he wanted to give him time to kind of digest what happened, to kind of process what was going on and whatever. So Drew reached out to him, and he ended up being a part of one of their shows. I think in Glasgow or in Scotland, I don't remember exactly, but they wanted to keep his appearance a surprise. He used to be there. He was the inaugural, I think, ICW champion, if I'm not mistaken. They really wanted to keep his surprise under wraps. He was very scared beforehand. He felt the pressure. He felt the adrenaline. So when he showed up, the crowd went nuts. Everyone was super excited. It was a great moment. And he talked about how he cut this long promo, and he talked normally, which is, completely right. I mean, at that point, too, prior to that point, all of his promos in WWE, he talked very monotone. My name is Drew McIntyre. That was a terrible accent, but that's how he spoke. But when he went back to the indies, he spoke normally as he is right now. Like, he cuts promos every week on Raw, like I am to you right now. He talked normally, and it helped him out a lot. It made his promos 10 times better. So he pointed out that Mick Foley, a lot of people are praising his work on the indies, but one person that really came to his, not rescue, but like came to his aid and really put him over was Mick Foley. And I remember hearing this comment on the Stone Cold podcast. It was on Steve Austin's Unleashed show on Podcast 1, and they include the clip here. McIntyre, or, Mick Foley told Stone Cold about McIntyre, yeah, he's doing some great work, and I would see him in 3MB, and I enjoyed 3MB, but I would never really ever see him beyond like a mid-card or like an undercard guy, but, he changed my mind in 10 minutes with that promo. Like, I could see him as a future world champion, blah, 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 and I could see them, bringing him back at some point, all this other stuff. He put him over huge. And at the same time, not only did he really want to reinvent himself, he also wanted to elevate the indie scene, which he did by being back in the UK, doing his stuff and whatever. And that was really when he started to find his footing. So he also became, in addition to winning back the ICW title, he was doing the What Culture Pro Wrestling stuff, which is now Defiant, or I guess it's closed now, but that's what it was at the time. He was doing TNA. They don't talk about TNA. They don't show the TNA footage, which was kind of disappointing, but whatever. Because he was the TNA World Heavyweight Champion at one point, but I don't know. They've included TNA footage here on the 24s before. That's what kind of surprised me. But I guess they would rather show the footage of the promotions they do own in ICW and Evolve. So he became the third ever Evolve champion, I think beating Ricochet. And his dad talked about at one point, and his dad's all over this doc, that he actually had 5 titles at one point, which was pretty impressive. At the same time, though, as rewarding as his life was, it was very difficult because he was always on the road. His wife said that she would only see him sometimes for a week out of the month, which is crazy. Like, that's unbelievable. And then also going out and hanging out with people after these shows, he really ran down his body and especially his immunity. He ran it into the ground. So he mentioned how it was a tough time to maintain his personal relationship with his wife. And honestly, one of the best things that happened to him was when he broke his neck in 2016 because he had to take time off. I don't remember that. He was in TNA at that point, so I don't remember him having to take time off because he won the TNA World title in 2016 at one point. I don't remember when that would have been. Did he take that much time off? I don't remember, but anyway. He had to take time off, and that was the best thing to happen to them. really evaluated the relationship, had some very serious conversations, and really devoted himself to being a better person. And she even went to, his family and talked about how, I think he's got to change, otherwise I can't really do this anymore. And he knew that he had to make some big decisions as both a man and as a partner. And she told him, as well as his family, that things needed to change. So he turned his life around, and that was around the time that William Regal got in touch with Drew McIntyre about potentially coming back to WWE. So he told McIntyre to get in touch with Triple H, which he did. And as soon as that conversation was over that Drew had with Triple H, he knew that he wanted to go back to WWE, but specifically NXT. And his mind was made up. So he found out about his appearance at TakeOver Orlando, which I was in attendance for, and I remember that, like, holy shit, it's Drew McIntyre, which was crazy. He found out about that the day of. He was there anyway doing, indie shows. He was on other Evolve shows, whatever, that same fucking weekend, which is crazy. He mentioned how his mind was racing leading up to it, and they raced him out there to go sit in the seat before the lights came back on and they showed him on camera. He thought people wouldn't remember him. He's like, oh, fuck, what if the lights go on? And there's, like, no reaction. Like, that's so scary. What if they don't remember me? And, of course, they did. And they went nuts. I went nuts. It was a great moment. And then from that point forward, he thought of it as day one. I got to rebuild myself back up. I got to work myself back up. I got to work my way back up the ladder. And that's exactly what he did. They show a montage of him beating all these people in NXT, having great matches with Killian Dane, Oney Lorcan. Andrade was another one who went on to win the NXT Championship from Bobby Roode at TakeOver Brooklyn 3. Went on to have more great matches with Roderick Strong and Andrade and people like that. Adam Cole lost the championship. They don't really talk about him getting hurt. They kind of brushed through all of that. And then he came back to Raw on April of 2018. Another show I was in attendance for. It was the Superstar Shakeup in Hartford. Got the big call up and showed up that moment, which was pretty awesome. And it was around that point where he was like, all right, it's time for the future to become the present. They can't keep calling me the future forever. My time has got to be now. So they fast forward to January when he eliminated Brock Lesnar from the Men's Royal Rumble match. And Ricochet was in the ring. He contributed to Drew eliminating Brock Lesnar. And he talks about how it was one of the loudest reactions he's ever heard. Obviously, it wasn't for him, but he was still in the ring when it happened, which is pretty crazy. So Drew talked about the pop when he won. It was the loudest pop he had ever heard, and it was unbelievable. One of my favorite moments ever. Just a great, great Rumble match, a great moment. The whole thing was beautiful. And Drew always said that his ideal opponent, and he said this in other interviews, his ideal opponent was Brock Lesnar. That was the guy that he really wanted to face. And he kind of had to sit down and catch his breath for a moment when he was on Raw one week and went backstage, and Ricochet was like, oh, look at that. It's cool. It was the graphic of Brock and Drew at WrestleMania. And he's like, holy shit, I've always envisioned this. I never really thought it was real, or would be real until now. So I'm like, holy shit, it's an actual thing, And then he thought nothing could go wrong. And then coronavirus struck. So he talked about this in the Chronicle that came out around WrestleMania time, like the day before WrestleMania, how he was on Scotland. He was in Scotland on a media tour at the time. And he's seen this all unfold, and he's super pissed about it. That was his initial, reaction was being angry and depressed and thinking about himself as any normal person would. But he thought WrestleMania would still go on until it didn't. So they had to rush him out of the country, couldn't go see his family, had to go back to the States before travel had to end and whatever. So he thought WrestleMania would still go on. Obviously it didn't. And then he realized, listen, I gotta drop my selfish outlook. We're doing this for the people. We're putting the show on during a pandemic. It's not about me anymore. It's about putting on a show for the people. So he recalls his weird WrestleMania experience, putting on his boots in the back with no one there and how weird it was, right? 15 minutes before bell time. And they recapped the match with Brock and how he kind of got his ass beat a little bit, but then he hit 4 Claymores. He kicked out of a bunch of F5s. They may have shown 1 or 2 here, but he kicked out of a bunch, and I really thought that was it. But nope, he hit 4 Claymores, 3 or 4 Claymore kicks, and he won the WWE Championship. And one of the coolest moments was when he thanked the fans through the camera afterwards, saying thank you, which was really, really cool. So his wife talked about how never again will they be able to watch an event like that where she's watching her husband's match at WrestleMania on the couch with her husband with a bowl of popcorn in her hand. That's never probably going to happen again. So that's exactly what happened because they taped that WrestleMania like a week or 2 in advance. So after the championship, after the match, after he won the title on the show, she presented him with the title in real time. And they show the reactions, watching from home, which was really cool. The brother says that he wished he could have been there, but it was still an amazing moment. This is really when I almost started crying. I almost bawled here. They had this Zoom call with the family afterward, like with his brothers, his entire family, his dad. And his dad got really emotional about it. He started crying, and then Drew started crying, and I almost started crying. And his dad said it was the greatest moment of his life. And he said that it was a really special moment for everyone and that his mom watched every match. And, she may not have been there for it, but he knew that she was watching from above, which was really cool. So to close out the doc, he gets praise from Noam Dar, Killian Dane, Wolfgang, his own wife. And he still finds it hard to believe that he's living the dream every day. And he's still the WWE champion as we speak, going into Hell in the Cell on Sunday. So an amazing WWE 24. I really, really enjoyed this. One of the better ones I've seen. And they've done a lot of great ones in 2020 on Ric Flair. They did one on WrestleMania 35, WrestleMania 36. They've done a shit ton. The Edge one was amazing. Maybe not quite as good as that one, but this one was still very, very good. And even if you saw the Chronicle earlier this year, I still implore you go out of your way to check out Drew McIntyre, The Chosen One, episode of WWE 24. It's that fucking good. So at any rate, guys, be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. We got hashtag AskGSM coming up a little later on today, so keep an eye out for that. We got WrestleRant radio excerpts on Thursday. On Friday, we have my Alexa Bliss Uncool with Alexa Bliss podcast review featuring Ryan Cabrera. Saturday, my SmackDown and Talking Smack review. We have on Sunday my Chronicle review. Speaking of Chronicle with Bailey, that goes up on Saturday. That review should be up on Sunday. So a lot to get to, a lot to talk about. Keep an eye out, and all that content coming soon right here to the channel. Enjoy all of it. I hope you guys do. Enjoy the rest of your week. I'm Graham G. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.